Photography is fundamentally an impression, and landscape photography is no different. It's the story that engrosses us when we find something spectacular, the narrative that swallows the scene. It's the foreground to the midground to the background and everything that brings it all together, from the light to the air to the grass under our feet. And so when we're trying to grow as landscape photographers, we're trying to grow in our ability to tell a story about something beautiful, something natural, something immense in front of us, and that inherently is quite a subjective process. So then how can we improve if quality in and of itself is indistinguishable, undefinable in many ways? It's a feeling and it's a subjective one. Then growth itself must be subjective too. And so what that means is, as individuals, we need to, set targets, have a feeling of progression. We need to ultimately understand where we want to go with our photos. I want to understand that my photos are improving in some way. And I've found that the 5 techniques I'm going to talk about today, they really help me kind of develop a sentiment of progress. If the goal is ultimately to follow along a path, even if there's no end, then there's got to be a way to mark yourself. And I find that these techniques help me to do that. To go through them one by one, I'm actually going to present an image for each technique. And these images are associated with stories as well. So each image will help me to explain a way that I personally work to get better, and I'll explain how I think you can use it that same way. Inspiration, as simple as it may seem, is the most paramount technique we have in growing as photographers. It helps us to put our own work in context, to understand art, to understand composition and the rules and how those rules best can be broken. So when we find inspiration, we give ourselves an opportunity to not only learn and to learn about perhaps another person's work and another person who's more experienced than us, but we give ourselves the opportunity to learn about how our own work can grow. And this has resulted in most of my favorite work. I am a big fan of buying books and looking through photo albums that way, but just something as simple as Instagram or YouTube can help you to see the work that may inspire your next project. This photo I'm bringing up here was entirely inspired by Will Patino here on YouTube. I have always feared forest-based photography and the clutter that comes along with shooting in the woods, but it's something I knew would help expand my portfolio in an immense way if I could get comfortable with it. So I studied his work and watched many of his videos, and that's not to say that this photo comes even remotely close to what he's capable of, but the lessons I took out of looking at his work helped me to understand how I wanted to compose this piece. Understanding the three-dimensionality of the forest and the various characteristics that a gnarled tree exhibits. By being able to isolate a small scene in what is otherwise a vast, expansive landscape allowed me to make something that may have plenty of room for improvement, but is a big step forward in my work. And it's one of the first photos I took here in New Zealand that I truly love from the woods. As we grow as photographers, we'll naturally gravitate towards something that makes us feel comfortable, a familiarity. And this often comes in, of course, our camera, but also in the lens or lenses that we choose to put on it. And as we develop this familiarity, we can really begin to grow as an artist. And this next technique is not meant to discredit that in any way. I think it's crucial for us to find style and find comfort in a lens. I think as we ultimately settle into a focal length and begin to see the world with that focal length in mind, we open up a realm of creativity. However, I think sometimes we need to push outside of our comfort zone to grow, and one great technique for doing that is experimenting with a new focal length. This is a bit of a slippery slope, and I'm not encouraging you to go buy a whole bunch of new lenses or even to buy a new lens at all. I often rent a lens just so that I can experiment. A day or a week with a new lens can expand the bounds of your creativity quite quickly, and it's something that's really quite beneficial. Now, this next photo was taken up in the Nelson Lakes area of New Zealand, a really beautiful place. And what happened was a beautiful sunset was coming in, and we watched it settling for what felt like hours. The long golden evenings of a late summer in New Zealand are intoxicating. And I had the time to think about my composition and then rethink it. And I realized that the scene would be better represented using a new focal length. I pulled out a focal length that I wasn't entirely comfortable using, and I forced myself to use it through the whole sunset. And in this case, it allowed me to bring in the foreground with the grass curving through towards the mountain in the background. So this scene was only possible because of this focal length that I wasn't quite comfortable with. And since then, this wide-angle lens has actually barely left my camera. It's what I use, really more often than any other lens, and in fact I talk about that in a video I'll link somewhere up here. So consider using a new focal length the next time you're looking for some creativity, and you might find that it quickly will improve not just that moment, but your overall view towards a landscape. All too often as photographers, we niche down, and we niche down too quickly. Now what this means is we fixate and we find something, whether it's landscape photography, portraiture, weddings, whatever it may be, we find something that we shoot nearly exclusively. And it's our goal, of course, as perfecters of that genre to grow, to spend the time at that. But ironically, one of the very best techniques we have, and one of the ones that's been the most useful to me, is to experiment with new genres. Now, this photo I'm showing you here was taken in the Costa Rican jungle, and it's of a sloth in the middle of a rainstorm climbing through these trees, and in this special moment, the sloth reaching up and finding this light, finding this moment of reprieve from the rain. Really special moment. Now, I show this because wildlife for me has taught me an immense amount about landscape photography. First, it makes me a perfectionist with using my camera, because there is nothing more demanding than the fleeting moments of wildlife photography. And if you don't have everything dialed quickly, you miss it almost every time. And so it's helped me become better as a camera technician. But then it's allowed me to process scenes faster, whether it's portraiture or experimenting in scape photography, experimenting in architecture, finding a new genre that can push us outside of our comfort zones. It will teach us lessons that we can bring back to our primary niche. And if that's landscape photography for you, then I believe other genres will help you become a better landscape photographer. In all of my time as a photographer, or as a landscape-focused photographer especially, there's one specific thing that has helped me to differentiate my photos and to grow the absolute fastest. And that is to go out of my way to be in uncomfortable positions, to go where other people simply aren't. If you find that perspective that others are avoiding, you inherently allow yourself to create something more unique, and you also put yourself in a position to diagnose a scene in a new way. This, in This will absolutely help you to grow as a landscape photographer, to help you see a scene for what it's worth up front, and also to consider how else it can be perceived from different uncomfortable angles. Now, the photo I'm showing you here of the aurora over a small sea stack is special not just because it's my first and favorite aurora photo ever, but also because this night was against us in every way. The conditions weren't good. All of the aurora forecasting said that this wasn't going to happen. And the next day, this area shut down because of a volcanic eruption that covered the road and fractured so much of the town of Grindavik just a few minutes away. So we were there hours before cataclysm in conditions that weren't conducive to aurora and a forecast that said this wasn't going to work, and yet we were there. And we were alone, and we got a photo and an opportunity that was unlike anything else I've ever experienced. Now, seeking that uncomfortable position, putting ourselves out there, that resulted in something beautiful. And for me, it's the biggest lesson I can leave with you. If you're seeking those uncomfortable positions, if you're going out of your way to be somewhere else, you are putting yourself in a position to be more successful. And the more times you do that, the more opportunities you'll have to grow as a photographer, and specifically as a landscape photographer, where these challenging environments are so crucial to our ability to create a compelling narrative, to ultimately produce a compelling portfolio. So take the time, go somewhere uncomfortable. Push yourself just a little higher up the hill, to the top of the mountain, to the position that other people aren't going to. Finally, and maybe most importantly, try to tell a story, to build a narrative in your photographs. This act of seeing the scene, analyzing everything that's in it, and ultimately finding what it is that's compelling, what it is that's evocative. This act not only helps you to keep your viewers' interest by bringing story into it, but it also makes you more intentional in the way that you photograph. This is an easy way to start improving your work, and it's an easy way to make your work more compelling for others. This photo that I'm showing here, the fifth and final photo that I call The Wanderer, is a scene that I had set it up sort of without any human element, really without any story involved. I just compressed the scene together, and I thought it was fine, but not particularly interesting. And I looked around and figured I'd try to bring something else in when I saw this figure wandering along the ridge and ultimately heading towards the center of the frame. So I let them wander and enter, and I took the photo. And in the end, the effect of having this person front and center, it's transformative for the photograph. It gives it the intrigue that ultimately makes it an interesting or compelling piece. And I try to do this in a whole lot of photographs. I do often use a human element. It's a big part of my style, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a human element that adds story to a photograph. It's just something with emotion, a tangible, evocative state. So try to tell a story. Consider what it is that makes a scene emotional. If you're photographing it, you have an attachment to it for some reason, so find ways to build that into the photograph that goes beyond beauty and into the compelling nature of the scene. So while a beautiful photo is a subjective idea, and our pathway to becoming a better photographer is unique to each of us, I hope these 5 techniques are still useful to you. Finding inspiration in other people's work, trying new lenses and new genres, seeking new perspectives, and perhaps most importantly, trying to find the story in a scene. Each of these are ways for us to experiment. Each of these are a way for us to become more intentional and to ground our work in elements that ultimately can make it more compelling. Take these, run with them, find what's useful to you, and find what techniques that I haven't mentioned are useful to you. I'd love to know what you guys do to grow as photographers outside of, just these 5 things. This is just a small sample of ways we can grow. And with that, I hope this was useful. I'd love to chat in the comments below, and I hope you guys have a great day. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.